それではこれより TOC クラブを始めさせていただきます。今回はアメリカ・ユタ州からスペシャルゲストをお招きして講演をしていただきます。テーマは組織をダメにする7つの誘惑とはです。それではまず最初に岸田さんからご紹介をお願いしたいと思います。
はい、皆さんこんばんは。実は僕は彼女に会ったのは数年前なんですけれども、アメリカのコンファレンスでしたけども、彼女のプレゼンの素晴らしさにもちろんコンテンツは素晴らしいんですけれども、この舞台から落ちないで盲目の人がしゃべるというこのチャレンジを笑わせながらですね、しかしですね、本当に中身については本物で、今日は行政の話をしてほしいと思ったんですけど、内容を見るとこれ行政だけに当てはまらないんじゃないだろうかと思えるくらい、素晴らしいお話をしていただきます。なかなか彼女みたいなね方が日本に来てくださるということはありえないことなんですけども、本当に日本を良くするということを、協力してくれるということでですね、一肌脱いでいただいたということで特別に来ていただいたというのが実態でございます。今回ビデオを撮っています。皆さんいろいろメモも書かれると思うんですけど、それは大事だと思うんでいいんですけども、実はこのビデオ字幕をつけて皆さんにも見ていただけるように、したいと思ってますので、ご心配なく皆さんに伝えたいという思いもあると思うので、それについては我々の方でやらせていただきますので、ぜひ、そこもご理解いただきたいと思います。それはもう本当にもう、彼女を、日本に連れてこれたことを大変我々も誇りに思ってまして、もう彼女僕は大ファンでございます。でぜひ彼女が初めて会った時から絶対日本に来ていただきたいということで、これから2回目、来ていただきました。ではクリス・コックスに来ていただきたいと思います。クリス、はい、では拍手をお願いします。
Good evening. Such a pleasure and honor to be here. I'm so grateful for Yuji-san and his remarkable team for inviting me here. You have some of the most brilliant minds in the world at your disposal with his team. And I recognize how busy all of you are. You've worked long days, and to come here tonight really is an honor for me. So I hope I can provide some value and insight as you go about trying to make an impact in your own organizations and in your own teams and in your own lives. I am blind, so that's why this is not a fishing pole. It is a cane. And so I do use PowerPoints, and hopefully what I'm talking about is actually on the PowerPoint. So just work with me. Be flexible. And I will try to speak slowly for the interpreter. But we have my co-author of the book, a lot of the concepts I'm going to be talking about tonight, is also here with me, Dr. Ishai Ashlag. So I'm going to make sure he gets credit for the concepts we'll be talking about tonight. So, Yuji, where are you? My clicker guy. Okay, we're going to be clicking. Okay, first slide. I'm going to the first slide. Tonight we're going to talk about the illusion of progress. This idea that we're very busy, and we make changes, and we introduce new initiatives and new strategic plans, and we feel like we're successful. But at the end of the day, have we really made a difference? Have we really moved the needle, or do we just have the illusion of progress? Very often in the world that we live in, the theory of constraints, we talk about the idea simply that every improvement resulted from a change, but not all changes result in an improvement. And we're busy making changes all the time. But very seldom do we make the kind of breakthrough results we know our organizations are capable of achieving. So I want to talk about tonight, how do we distinguish between the illusion of progress and real progress so that we can do the right things for our organization? So all of this idea of the illusion of progress starts with the idea that we need to start by stopping, right? We're so distracted by a million ideas. How do we create the discipline and the tools so we can filter out the things that don't work, so we can focus on the very few things that do work, that will yield the kind of results that we need for our organizations. Next slide, Yuji. I love art, which is funny because I'm blind, I know, but I love the idea of art. And I studied for a while Picasso, and these lithographs I love. And there's a story behind this, but Picasso first created a picture of a bull. And as he iterated through these pictures, these renditions, the more he worked on, the more he stripped out. The more he took away from the painting to get finally to his final picture, the essence of what he was trying to get to. So we talked tonight, I want to emphasize this point that a lot of what we're trying to do in our organizations is strip away, to simplify, to subtract, not to keep adding, to take away until we can get to the very essence, to the real core problem that we need to tackle. And that's difficult. And I'll talk about tonight why that is so difficult and hopefully some insights to help you filter out the noise from the true signal. All right? So next slide. Steve Jobs had a great quote. And he talks about that the idea of focus really isn't about saying yes to that one thing. He, in fact, was more proud of all the things he said no to. That real innovation is about saying no to the 1,000 good ideas. To have the courage and the discipline to say no to every interesting idea that comes across our desk. I remember as I was starting my career, I would go to a conference and I'd come back with tons of notes and a lot of ideas, and I'd come back so excited. Anyone done that? Lots of ideas? And I'd go back to my team with lots of ideas, and they would just hate it when I would go to these conferences because I'd come back and just crush them with a bunch of new ideas. I was really struggling with this art of discipline and focus. So tonight we're going to talk about what we call, I missed that slide, the seductive 7, which are the 7 things that I've seen happen time and time again in organizations that distract us from focusing on what really matters. I've worked in probably over 200 major systems now. Been in this work I do for many, many years. And by the way, I work for our governor in Utah, and I'm over the budget and over all the operations for our state. I work back under President Bush in Washington, D.C. I've worked on cabinets for 3 governors now. I've worked for nonprofits. I've seen this from all levels. And time again, I see these same patterns pop up. And these patterns are now represented in our book called Stop Decorating the Fish, and what we call and talk about the seductive 7. They are these common things we jump to, strategies, solutions we jump to try to solve the problem, but we actually don't make a big difference. All right? So we're going to go through each one of these and spend some time. But these things are so common that we almost can't see them. There's a quote in our book that I love, and it says, "I don't know who discovered water, but I know it wasn't a fish." Right? We're so surrounded by these things we're going to talk about tonight. More technology, more money, more training, more data, more reorganization, more strategy, more blaming. We jump to these so often, and everybody else around us is doing the same, that's very difficult to see that these really are not by themselves the solutions. And they're almost we call them seductive by design, because sometimes we may need some of these elements as a tactic, as part of our solution. But they by themselves will never be the solution. And when we chase these things by themselves, we waste time, money, and equally important, if not more important, our teams get disillusioned, right? We burn out our teams. So let's go to the next slide. The first one we're going to talk about tonight is more money. And Yuji, your goal tonight is if I am on a slide that isn't the right slide, you have full power to tell me that. All right? First one we're going to talk about is more money. All right? All of us have, I'm sure, been either ourselves or experienced the first time somebody has a problem, they raise their hand and say, "I need more money." Right? More staff, more equipment, more resources, more. You can go to the next slide. This is the cartoon slide, Yuji. I love this slide. If you don't know how to use your existing resources, it doesn't matter how many you have, right? More resources, if you don't know how to use them well, won't matter. Being over the budget for the state, I see people all the time coming into our office saying, I've got a demand problem, I have a quality problem, my first answer is give me more money. Here's the reality. I talked to some folks here in government, and I'm assuming this is the same challenge in Japan. In Utah, we have one of the best performing economies in the country in the United States. We have great revenue growth, very strong economy, and yet, for all of the money we get in our government, for all the new revenue we generate, there will never be enough money to meet the demand for services. Just won't happen. For every $1 we have in new revenue, there are $4 of requests. There will never be enough money to meet all the demands, right? It just won't happen. Now, go to the next slide. The challenge is when people think I need more money, that's the answer to my problem. The illusion they work under, the assumption, the flawed assumption is that we're using our existing resources as well as we can. We've already optimized, we've maximized our resources. There's nothing more we can do. So the only way out is more money. False assumption. In all of the organizations I've been in, I have not found one, not one, from child welfare to building roads to water quality to business permitting, that did not have significant capacity to do more within its existing resources. Not one. But most of them felt like they needed more money. All right, so that's a real challenge. In fact, we had one example, a great agency. They regulated the insurance industry. We had a 400% increase in the number of insurers coming to our state. Their work demand was out the roof, just crazy. They thought they needed to hire almost a 20% increase in their staffing to meet the demand. I'm a little grumpy when it comes to giving out money, so I said no. Go look at how you manage your resources. When they learned some of the concepts of the theory of constraints, they transformed their system, absorbed all the new workload, no new money required, right? So go to the next slide, Yuji. What we do not want the flawed assumption that we've maximized all of our resources. Really, what we want people to believe is that there is always hidden capacity in our organizations. We want people to have the mindset that there is hidden capacity, we just don't know where it is, we may not know how to find it, but it's there. And if we have that belief system, we'll have the tenacity, the courage, the curiosity to go find it. Oh, thank you, sir. I love that quote. You can go back to that. Jim Collins wrote the book From Good to Great. Good job. He said, made a great quote. He said, you know, the enemy of great is good. We don't have great government because we have good government. We don't have great lives because it's easy to settle for good lives, right? That is so true. And we feel like we're already doing pretty good, right? So we give up. We think we're as good as we can get. We can go ask for more money. So you can go back to the right mindset. In fact, when I go through these seductive 7, I want to reinforce all of this is about mindset. It's about the assumptions that we make. Yuji-san and I were talking today. The most critical thing we can do to help people to really unleash their potential, which is his mission, is to challenge these assumptions that we live under. And this assumption that I've used all my resources, I'm as good as I can get, that blocks us out of the gate from going deeper and finding how do we better utilize the resources we have. There is an advantage to being blind, and that is I don't have to see something to believe that it exists, right? Often we use the word hidden by design. It's hard to see. If people knew where it was, they'd already go figure it out. Sometimes we don't know where the hidden capacity is, or we haven't learned the tools or techniques to go unleash it. But when we start from the premise it's there, I just don't know how yet, just about anything is possible. But that does take some humility and the willingness to say, I don't know. All right, so that's the first seductive 7, right? This idea that I need more money. All right, let's go to the next one. This one is, they're all my favorite. I love them all. It's like all my children. I love all my boys. So the more training concept is this idea that you can go to the illusion. Well, actually go to the garbage can. This one I love. In America, unfortunately, I wish we ate as healthy as you do in Japan. We have fast food everywhere. And for many years, there was a fast food chain that had garbage cans that were rectangular, and they had trays. And people would take their tray, and they're supposed to just do this with their tray, let the garbage go in the tray, into the garbage can, and then put the tray on the side. Where some people just wouldn't think, and they would just dump the whole tray into the garbage can, right? And they kept trying to train people not to do that. They would put up signs over all the garbage cans. Please do not dump the tray into the garbage can. And people would read it, dump the tray into the garbage can, right? What they finally did is they made the garbage can round so that the square tray, it was impossible for it to go into the garbage can, right? Simple solution. Well, why do I share that example? Sometimes we have a broken process. You can go to the illusion. We believe that if people had more knowledge, more information, that they would change their behavior. Right? If we could just get them more information and train them more or market to them, that would change their behavior. Now this is tricky because sometimes training is helpful, right? But let me give you an example in Utah. Utah, has anyone been to Utah? And if you raise your hand, I'm not going to see you, so you can't raise your hand. You have to say something. Has anyone been to Utah? No one. It's hi, a few, right? So beautiful, but it's a desert state. If you've been there, you'll know. There's parts of the state that are just like a desert, and we're the second driest state in the United States of America. We're a really dry state. And so we're always worried about water usage. And we had an agency with very good intentions wanting to do a marketing campaign to try to help people, encourage people, motivate people to use less water. And they called it Slow the Flow. That was the name of their campaign. And after a few years of their marketing campaign, they looked at the numbers and noticed there was zero impact to people's water usage. People didn't conserve water any more than they had before the campaign. And why was that? Well, the reason why is water in Utah is very cheap. It's highly subsidized. And I don't need to get into the details of that, but it's a highly subsidized resource. So if it's very cheap, no matter how much marketing you do, it'll never overcome the fact that it's a very cheap resource. And if it's cheap, people will use it. Now, if you want to really stop people's behavior, what should you do? Change the price of the water, right? Make it more expensive. People will use less. It wasn't a marketing, it wasn't a training, it wasn't a communications problem. The fundamental system was broken. So we can go to what's the right mindset we want to have here? Rather than jumping to this idea that, if I could get people more information, they'd change their mind. Like the example of the garbage can. What we want to do is actually fix the problem itself. We want to make it natural for people to behave the ways that we want them to behave. That the process, the incentives, the system itself is designed in such a way that people will naturally make the decisions that we want to make. When we're trying to train people, we're trying to actually train them in a way to overcome the dysfunction in our system, and that'll never stick. It'll never work, right? You may get a momentary momentary fix, but it will never sustain itself. So that's one of the seductive 7. I see this all the time in government. We have big training initiatives. I'll give you one of my favorite. The United States just passed some legislation. It's called Family First. What that means, if I am an employee of the state and I'm working with a child who's been abused, right? These are very serious issues, that I don't want to just work with the child, I want to work with the whole family. So there's been training going on all across our country to help social workers work with the whole family. But these poor workers would go to the training and they would go back to a process that was completely broken, that gave them no time to really invest with the families. They were bad multitasking. They never had time to follow up, to kind of do quick turnaround and provide the intensity of services these families needed. They were training them to spend time with the families, but the process itself is broken. So what happens? The employees now start feeling the burden. They're not able to do what they want to do, right? They want to do the right thing. They've been trained on what to do, and yet we as managers have a broken process, right? It puts our employees in a horrible position. In fact, I want to emphasize here, when we talk about the seductive seven, they're usually about fixing everything, but where the real value is created, and that is on the front line. Where that real value is created, where the person's doing the work, and we just keep burdening them with all of these seductive seven and wonder why our employees aren't happy. Why aren't they reaching their potential? All right, so more training, that's one of the seductive seven. Let's go to the third, more data. We are obsessed with data, right? We somehow think data is just going to solve all of our problems. Well, let me give you some facts. Go to the next slide. Arches National Park, one of our most precious gems in our state, a beautiful national park, breathtaking. Even for a blind person, it's breathtaking, so that must be good, right? So there's some facts I want to give you about Arches National Park. It has over 2,000 arches, over 400 different species of plants. Its highest elevation's over 5,000 feet. Lots of different data points here you can see, 120 square miles. Pretty big park. Lots of data points. Go to the next slide. That's a picture of Arches. There's the data, but that's the understanding. The data itself cannot give you the insight, the true understanding you need to get what Arches is really all about. Beautiful, right? Next slide. The illusion we work under, the flawed assumption, is that the more data we have, the more understanding we'll have. So I see organizations doing big data, data integration, data dashboards, data everywhere. And we are data rich and information poor. We have few insights, less understanding, and in fact, we make it worse because our systems are so noisy that there's so much noise but no clear signal. It can be quite overwhelming to our teams. You can go to the next slide. This is the federal dashboard, right, Yuji? This is an example at our federal government level. They have a big dashboard, data dashboard, for trying to be transparent on how education is doing in our country. This looks at fourth grade reading levels, number of kids who are graduating from high school, number of individuals who are graduating from college. Lots of interesting data points. Kind of describes the problem, yes or no, but there's no insight here. There's nothing here that tells you what should we as a country do differently. Are these data points good or bad? What do we do differently to fix the trend? Nothing here. There are three questions we should always ask when looking at data. Number one, what are the questions we're trying to answer? Usually it's question. Yuji-san's a master at this. Number two, this is where do we get the data to answer the questions? And I see the people, too often our tech people just jumping to this, right? Building service buses and data integration portals. We spend tons of money on the collection piece. But the most important question of all of those is the third one. What will I do differently once I have the answers to my questions? What physical changes, what behaviors will occur if I have the answers to my questions, right? We have interesting data here, no insight. Next dashboard. This one is about IT projects. How much have we spent? Percent of projects that are on time, yada, yada. No insight. When I took over this job in the governor's office, it's been about 7 years now, the agencies were reporting up to the governor their balanced scorecard. Has anyone heard the balanced scorecard? We had, in my office, every month, over 700 measures coming into our office from all the different cabinet members. Over 700 measures. What do you think I did with those measures? I threw them in the garbage can. No one can manage with 700 measures. We're fooling ourselves. We're wasting people's time and paper to report on measures that give us no insight and just create confusion, right? And actually, at the end of the day, the more measures we create, the more data points we create, sometimes we actually make it worse for the front line because we send them competing priorities. What's important, what's not, what data to pay attention to, what data not to pay attention to. We just create confusion and chaos for people. Data are just words and numbers. That's all they are. They mean nothing. What we need is the ability to think, to reason, to use our logic. Data can validate, it can be a helpful tool, but it by itself will never be the answer. So remember, the illusion is we think we need, the more data we have, the more understanding we'll have. The reality is, you can go to the next slide, Yuji. Do not confuse more data for more understanding, right? It'll never get us there. I'm going to tell you a personal story. When I was going blind, I did a pretty intensive training program for people who are blind, and we had to wear sleep shades while we were training so that we would really be forced to use our hearing and to be good problem solvers using our hearing. I have a little vision on my left eye, so they would cover it up. And we were training down in Baltimore City, a really, really busy city in Maryland. And there was an intersection that was crazy busy. And there were like 6 different roads intersecting with each other. And they also had these devices. I don't know if you have them here for the blind here in Japan. Like if you go to cross the street, it makes a chirping noise. Do you have those for the blind here? In the United States, they have these machines. It will tell the blind person, it'll make a cheep, cheep, some obnoxious sound. I'm sorry, cross the street. Well, with 6 different roads intersecting with these chirping sounds on each different road, I was in noise overload. There was so much noise coming in and data points coming in, I had no idea if I should go straight, stop, left, or right. I had no bearing of where to go. It was such a lesson to me on the idea that less is more. That we, like the Picasso slides, need to strip out all of the noise in our systems and get to the very few data points that will answer the very key questions we need to do to make a physical change. All right, so more data, one of the seductive 7. Let's go to the next one. Huh? Oh, yes, thank you. This was a perfect example. When about 2 years ago, the legislature passed a bill to fund a data integration system for our criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system includes our prison, our courts, our adult probation officers. It's a fairly large system. And they appropriated millions of dollars to integrate all this data. And our Department of Technology hired people to start building out the service buses and all the technical requirements to start capturing this big data system, right? And as they started to build this out, I got involved, of course, because I always get the problem children in our state, to start looking at this thing. And with all the money they had spent on integrating data, we had 0 insight on what to do differently. Because here's the process. Somebody gets arrested, and they were trying to collect data for the arresting decision. Then there's a decision. Will they go on bail, be put to the jail? And they're collecting all the data there. And then it goes to the judge. The judge has to make a critical decision. Is this person guilty and should be set free, or is this person going to be sentenced to prison? And if so, for how long? What are the conditions? Maximum security, minimum security? It is the most important decision in this whole thing that is made. It dictates what everything else will happen downstream. Everything else. It's a key decision. And some data was being collected there, but not very much. And then there's all these downstream decision points that need to be made. They're collecting data just for the sake of collecting data everywhere in this system. And when we stopped and said, what's the real constraint here? What's the one leverage point, the one decision that's going to have the biggest impact on this? And let's focus our resources on that. Can we help the judge make a quicker, more accurate, more informed decision? And when we could get coalitions or consensus around that, then that's when the system started to flip. Because the data now became a tool to help the constraint, the judges, make the most important decision in this individual's life and for our communities, right? And all of a sudden, data became something helpful, not just a waste of time, energy, and resources. All right, thank you for that. Next one. So we have done, you got me off my deal. We are more reorganization. We'll go fast on this one. You can go to the illusion. The concept that we have under more reorganization is that I need to control or own the resources in order to get alignment or to get synchronization, right? I'm sure many of you have been through a reorganization. I've been through one. I've had to do one before. Again, one of the seductive seven, they're tricky because sometimes we need to do them. But they by themselves will never be the answer. So we see organizations in government all the time just move boxes around on a reorganization chart. And that somehow that's going to solve the problem. So not too long ago, before I took this job, there was a big effort to reorganize all of our technology across the state. So each agency had its own resources for technology, right? And they were all decentralized. So the big effort to reorganize and pull all of those resources up into a centralized technology shop. Not uncommon. I see that happen across the country. So they centralize all these services into one agency, now called the Department of Technology Resources. And you can imagine that people on the ground, the agencies, didn't really like this. They wanted to reorganize and centralize so they could get economies of scale, get some standard operating procedures, et cetera. But when they centralized, they lost the ability to be nimble, flexible, and responsive. So agencies have been really upset with this change for many years. So now what are legislators thinking of doing? What do you can imagine? Decentralizing the services again, right? Because they never solved the problem. They just moved it around. So you can go to the next slide. What we want to avoid is this idea that we need to own all the resources. And rather than moving the problem, we want to solve the problem. The idea that there's ever going to be an entity that owns everything, the government office of everything, will never happen. It will never exist. Even in the private sector, sales, marketing, R&D, you're always going to have handoffs. You're always going to have points of desynchronization, right? The real challenge is solving the core problem regardless of where the resource is, and not spend the time, the energy, the heartache over the reorganization side of that. It's expensive, and usually at the end of the day, if there's any benefit, it's in the margins, 1%, 2%, but there's been a lot of damage done in the process, all right? So be very careful of jumping into reorganizations as part of your big solution. All right, next one is, say it. Yeah, this is my favorite. I have to save all of them, this really is. I say they're all my favorite, but this one really is. Because I'm angry about it. We spend billions in the United States, billions, on technology. And you would think, for all of the money we spend on technology, that our government would be 1,000 times better off, more productive, more efficient, and more effective. Just not true. It's like we spend money in technology, and it somehow disappears into the bureaucracy. And then you really wonder, what was the benefit of that, right? So go to the next slide. This is a picture from our book. We love this. You know, you could just pick up a barbell and just lift the weight, or you can go to this big, complicated, sophisticated, complex machine. Somehow we're obsessed with sophistication and complication. And the more complex the solution is, somehow the better off I think we think it is. That we have more confidence in complex solutions than we do in simple, elegant solutions. I think simpler is much more difficult, actually, than complicated. When people tell me very often, you know, I'll talk to somebody, ask them, and they'll say, well, it's just complicated. Well, that just usually means you don't know what you're talking about, right? These can be a lot of details, but we really need to avoid sophisticated solutions and get to the essence of what really needs to be fixed, especially with technology. Let's go to the next slide. We labor under this illusion that we just need a new tool or a new capability. If I just had this new capability, then all of a sudden my problems would be resolved. But think, technology is just a tool, right? If you pick up a hammer, if you pick up a screwdriver, you know exactly why you need that tool. It's very clear. But somehow we've lost the ability to think like that when it comes to technology. We just hear a new cool trend, a new vendor product. In fact, we have a solutions industry out there that is willing and ready to sell you just about anything. Be cautious, right? Technology can be powerful if it's used the right way. Let me give you an example. I was working and helping out a state in the United States. I won't share the name to avoid embarrassing them. And they had just purchased, before I got there, a $200 million system to help do what we call case management. They were serving low-income families, trying to help them make progress in their lives. A very expensive system. And the way they sold it is this agency, their workers were working out of 5 different programs, so that was a problem. And this technology could integrate all of those all of those systems into one. And this system also promised them to do what we call a rules-based system. That is, a lot of the decision-making would be made within the system itself and not have to be done manually. And essentially, they were trying to make decisions. Were these people eligible to receive public assistance, right? To get money to help buy housing and food, et cetera. So it was an eligibility system. So they spent $200 million to try to speed up the time it takes to make a decision and to improve the quality of the decision making. Well, needless to say, it has been a disaster for them, because here's the reality. The time it takes to make a decision, if you have all the information, only takes about 30 minutes. And all of this effort was going in to try to speed up a 30-minute process. The reality is, the point at which somebody made an application, the total elapsed time. So they make an application, and then the application's put into the system, and it waits and spins around, and somebody touches it, and it sits there, and it goes to another person, and sits there, and moves around again, and then goes back. By the time it comes out the other end, it's 30 days or more. 30 minutes to process the decision, the entire process, 30 days. And the technology was focused on the 30 minutes. They're trying to solve the wrong problem. The real problem was the workflow, right? And that didn't require a $200 million system, I guarantee it. So what we want to do in technology, you can go to the next slide, is we first want to understand what is the core limitation, right? What's the real constraint, the core problem on the business side? On the business side, no technology. What's the core problem? Then and only then we can decide if technology can amplify, enhance the business solution, right? Whatever decision we come up with. And in fact, in this system, I've worked in many systems like this, and once they're built, we can go in and flip them with no new money and get massive improvement, but we actually have to ignore the technology and work around it, because technology can hardwire all of the errors into our system, and now we just get faster at making errors. Right? We just speed up a dysfunctional process. So technology can be a great tool if used well, but it can also be pretty detrimental to our system and very expensive. There's a big opportunity cost when we buy these systems. And our workers on the front line, I've heard from so many folks, don't like the technology. They're always doing workarounds, and I'm sure you've all experienced that. So technology can be a really challenge. Let's go to the next slide. We, in our Department of Technology Services that was centralized, would get all of these business cases for wanting to build IT. Had my team go through over 300 business cases. Reasons why our agency said they needed more technology. Here's some common responses we got, right? Want to go mobile, don't want to have a manual process, I want to upgrade, I have a legacy system, I need to modernize my system. None of these are the core problem. None of them. And yet, not one of those 300 business cases had identified the true core problem. They're always kind of in these kind of categories of reasons why. So we're starting a whole new process in our state to really filter out up front, how do we define the core problem before we start to automate it? And it's been extremely successful so far. So that's another one of our seductive 7. 2 more to go. So the next one is the idea of more strategy. I am so over strategic plans, if I can just say. Strategy is important, but what happens is we keep jumping from strategic plan to strategic plan. Let me give you an example. Go to the next slide. This is a picture of Mars. The United States has a goal to get to Mars by year 2030. Love it. Ambitious goal, very clear. I love clear goals. We could spend another hour just talking about that, but I won't. But we have a very clear goal in the United States, get to Mars by year 2030. Now, the challenge in getting to Mars is not about having a new strategy. They have a strategy, right? They're going to take a rocket or some kind of ship and move it from here to the Earth to there, to Mars. Now, the problem with all of this is going to be in the execution. They're going to come across a million different challenges as they try to actually create some kind of vehicle to get us from point A to point B. How do you keep people alive that long? There's a lot of wear and tear on a person's body. There's a lot of stuff around this issue that's going to be a challenge. The challenge is in execution, not about a new strategy. Next slide. Our challenge is that we often think the mindset, the flawed assumption is that we just need a new idea. We're not getting the results we want, so if we just had a new idea, our problems would go away. I see this in our institutions of higher ed all of the time. There's always a new flavor of the day, a new strategic initiative to help students graduate, to reduce costs, and there's a new, literally every year for the past 7 years that I've been in my office, they've come out with a new strategic plan. That if we just had a new idea, it would work. Think of Jeff Bezos with Amazon, right? Amazon was built with the strategy of having one place to buy everything you would need. Great strategy. The problem is not in his strategy. All of his challenges, you can imagine, are in execution. Supply chain, vendor agreements, stock, inventory, all in execution. Can you imagine if every time he hit a problem, he just jumped to a new strategy? Amazon wouldn't exist. Execution's tough. You got to stick with it. You got to break all the conflicts as you do dive deep into your operations, into execution. Sometimes people hit a problem, they think the thing's impossible, they walk away from it. Story over. Example, in my son's school, our youngest son is 13, and he loves what we call STEM education. He loves the sciences, engineering, math. And in his school, there was only a couple computer classes taught in his school, right? These kids had 23 what we call electives, 23 classes they could choose from, and only actually one of them was a computer class. So we went to the principal, we went to the administrators of the school, and we said, how do we get this fixed? They said, yes, we believe that the strategy's right, but we can't solve it because our teachers don't have the right skill set. Our teachers aren't trained to teach computer science. We can't get them. So they just walked away from it and went to a new strategy. Instead of doing STEM education, they have a whole new strategy now. Their conflict was in execution. This happens all the time. We get an idea, we go to execute it. Our teachers don't have the skill set. Oh, so we must walk away from it and then get a new strategy. No. The core thing is to believe everything is possible. Our systems are made up. Everything in government, I have to tell my teams all the time, it's made up. It's not like quark theory or physics. It's made up. So if we don't like how it's working, design it a different way. Think through it. The theory of constraints is so powerful because it gives us the thinking tools to break the conflicts so we never have to compromise. So we can think through the difficult, entrenched, chronic problems and break through them to get to the other side. But we just give up when it gets a little bit hard and move to a new strategy. It drives me crazy. Let's go to the next slide. So this one is our final slide. Oh, what is it? Oh, the solution, yeah. What we really want, the right mindset we want here is we want to focus on excellent execution. I've kind of been talking about that forever. That's really what we want. You know, once you get the right strategy and you've really understood what your core problem is and you have the right direction of a solution, right? Strategy is just the direction of a solution. It's not the complete solution. You know what the direction you need to go. The real challenge is going to be in execution. I mean, on a very personal note, coming over here to Japan this past week, I knew the direction I was going, Japan, right? But I knew along the way, I was going to hit a lot of challenges as a blind person. I was talking to this with some colleagues tonight about it. And the execution side. How am I going to get to my next gate? How am I going to find the plane? Just all the details that go in execution, right? The challenge usually is once we have the direction, that's kind of the easy part. The harder part is on the ground, really working through all the problems that we don't know until we get into it. There's only so much planning you can do. There's some stuff you just can't know until you're in the middle of it. And then can you have the tenacity and be resourceful enough to figure it out as you go and break the conflicts? And not settle, not compromise, not walk away and say, oh, I'm not going to Japan. No, you figure it out and use the tools of the theory of constraints to solve the problem. We have a belief here in the theory of constraints, and it's so important. Every conflict can be broken. Like, that's not just rhetoric. We don't just say that because it feels good. It is essential to get breakthrough results. It is the only way to get breakthrough results. The people who get breakthrough results push through all the hard stuff. In fact, what I've learned, I just want to go on just a side note for a second. What I've seen that's so remarkable about this work is that the journey of improving our organizations is really the journey of improving ourselves. Being okay with being uncertain, working through the conflict, being tenacious, being curious, not giving up. It's not like you're just one way at work and then a different person at home, right? We develop ourselves as human beings as we go through this journey of developing our organizations. They're one and the same. And that's what you as managers, leaders, colleagues with other peers, you can offer the people you work with. All right, so let's go to the next one. More blaming and accountability. And this is just kind of the foundation of all this. Just the foundation. The assumption that we have here, the flawed assumption, is that other people hinder and limit our ability to make an impact. We see this a lot in government. We can blame the legislature. We can blame the opposing party. We can blame our boss. We can blame our peers. We can blame and relinquish the power to everybody else around us. And then we get to act like the victim. I would do it, except he won't let me. I would do that, but my boss wouldn't give me the money, right? First of all, what a horrible way to live your life, in a state of being a victim. But equally important is you give up all the power to make a difference. If you really believe you're held captive to everybody else, you've relinquished your power, right? You've given more power to other people than to yourself to make the difference. And I see this, unfortunately, more than I would like to. And last week, I spent a couple days with our Department of Corrections. They're the folks that run our prison. And the director there is such a good guy, and he was talking about this issue. In the prison system, when you're working with offenders who have committed pretty difficult crimes, he said it's so easy to start blaming everyone else around you. You can blame the courts, right? You can blame the families of these people who didn't raise good kids. You can blame what we call the Board of Pardons and Parole. They're the ones that make the decision if the person can leave the prison or not. He said it's so easy just to blame everybody else around us. And then when they do that, all of their energy goes to everybody else instead of looking at what can they do. What resources, what do they have? You can go to this next slide on this one. They don't look at, which is the real solution, the right mindset. What resources do I have? What do I have control over? What money, what policies, whatever. What do I have control over that I can use to make an impact? And he said, when we turn our attention from other people to ourselves, what do we own? It's like, wow, it opens up. And after 2 days of working with these individuals who were just wonderful people but felt constrained, they didn't have a way out. But when you say, wait, you have all the power to make an impact for what you own. Let's see what you own. And how are you doing with that? And there's endless possibility, right? Their eyes opened up. There's tons of stuff. They have some amazing, brilliant, beautiful targets now. They're going to try to reduce by half the time it takes for somebody to actually, what we call, comply with their sentencing requirements, that their risk is reduced in a way that they're able to go back into society. So normally they're on parole for 36 months. They're going to try to get that to 18 months, which is in half, which is a big deal. That never happens, ever, ever, ever. And do it in a way that these people are safer. They're safer than they were by far before this initiative. That is not a discussion they would have had a few months ago, because they understand the power is with them. And when you get your own house in order, when you are so good with what you own and what you have responsibility over, then and only then do we have the right to even suggest to others how to do their work. We need to earn our way into that space. And we expand our circle of influence when we walk our talk and make sure our own house is in order. And there's so much you can do. And that's where it becomes fun. I mean, let's be honest. This work is hard. It can be discouraging sometimes. You don't get the results you want when you want it. You don't always get the buy-in the way you want it. And I can feel that way, just like anyone else. But then I have to pull myself back in and remember, I'm just responsible for me. What am I doing? When I start trying to manipulate or control other people, I've lost sight of what I'm about. My job isn't to control other people. My job is to do my very best with what I have. And that's fun, and there's nobody limiting my ability to do that. If the legislature doesn't agree with me, I don't have to get mad at them. What can I do better to make a better presentation? What's going on with my skills for buy-in? Then you get the energy to keep going and to overcome those hard times that we all face when we don't get the outcomes we want. There's a great quote I heard once, I love it. It said, we can plant, but we cannot grow. Right? We can plant the seed, but we can't force the seed to grow. What is it that we can control? Let's get really good at that. And then let other people worry about them and spend our energy and our time on making sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. So that's the right mindset, right? Is to focus on really our own stuff. And then we can expand our circle of influence. All right, let's go to the last slide, and then I'll end with a story here. Here's the vicious cycle we see people getting into. These seductive 7, again, you guys, look, this sounds cute and sweet and fun, but I guarantee if you go back to your organizations tomorrow and pay attention, you're going to see these everywhere. The problem with these is that they do everything but make the physical change that you really need to make, right? You got to move from strategy to the actual on-the-ground change. What will people do differently because of all the work that's happened? And these distract us from doing that. So pay attention to these, be very cautious. We say you need to start by stopping, because if you start cleansing your organizations from all of these things, you start freeing up capacity to focus on the very few things that will make the difference. Because here's what happens if you don't. You're not getting the outcomes you want, so you feel pressure to launch an initiative. So you launch an initiative, you launch one of the seductive 7. So now your time, your energy, your resources are sprinkled across the organization, right? So your teams are stressed out. You're spending money that you shouldn't be spending. You don't get the results that you need because they're the seductive 7. You didn't tackle the core problem. The problem persists, so you launch new initiatives, and the cycle just goes on and on and on. Real good leaders have the courage to break the cycle, to say no to all of that stuff that isn't getting us the results we want. And I'm going to end just with a quick story. So going back to those days when I was going blind, my little journey, figuring out how to get to the other side of blindness, I was doing my own version of seductive 7, right? It takes courage sometimes to face the core problem head on and really be clear and courageous about what the real problem is. In fact, the seductive 7 are kind of fun and easy things to do. Much easier than going after the core problem sometimes. And I was using technology to try to overcome my blindness. I was doing a lot of stuff to avoid it. And I had this machine called a Visual Tech. And I would put a piece of paper under it, and it would come up on the screen, and it would magnify the letters so I could read the letters in large print. This machine was like this big. And I went down to live in Brazil for a couple years to do some work for my church. And I went down there, and I brought my machine with me on the airplane. And I get down to Brazil, and my machine is gone. Like, all my luggage is lost. And they finally find my machine, and it's completely broken. I send it back to the United States to get fixed. It comes back, still won't work. It's shot. So the first time in my life, I had to let go of all of the distractions, all of these crutches I was leaning on. Because really, these seductive 7, they're just crutches. They're just crutches. I had to let go of these crutches, the technology and the magnifying glasses and all this stuff I had been using. And I had to, for the first time in my life, deal with the reality I couldn't see. And I was losing my vision quickly. And it forced me to deal with the real core problem, which is to learn to use my ears, to listen, to learn Braille, all those things I had been avoiding. It's such a personal lesson. Like, this isn't just nice stuff to talk about. This is major stuff. We can lose millions of dollars, the morale of our employees, the stakes are high, people don't get the services they need, families struggle, economies struggle, we don't build the infrastructure that we need to build. There are high stakes consequences on this when we don't focus on the core problem. I lost years of my life because I didn't focus on the core problem. I couldn't see. I was relying on the crutches. The stakes are way too high to mess around with this stuff. And the deeper you get into this theory of constraints world and how profound and elegant it is, the more you'll be willing to let go of these things. To make a list, I encourage you, go back to your offices, make a list of all these initiatives that you think are part of the seductive 7. And just have the courage to say, maybe you don't have the authority, but whatever's in your stewardship, right? If you're not the boss, don't get in trouble. But whatever in your authority, have the courage just to say no and to start learning these tools so you can start saying yes to the things that really do matter. And with that, I am going to, you can go to the next slide. You can find me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, etc. And it's such an honor to be here tonight, and I appreciate it. That's it.
はい。いかがでしたでしょうか。クリス、目見えないって信じられます？我々少なくとも目見えてるけど、本当に問題の本質見えてるのかと思いません？僕がどうしても彼女を連れてきたいと思ったのは、やっぱりそういうふうな目を持ってるというのが素晴らしいと思ったんですけど、実は本当にすごい方なんですけどもね、実は今回ですね、彼女を連れてきたのにはもう一つ理由がありまして、今彼女は全米でベストの行政改革のアワードを取り、そして今全米から彼女のやっていることについて学びたいっていうのは、これ実は行政だけじゃなくて、実は民間にも官僚的なところってあるじゃないですか。そういうところを直そうっていうふうな今モメンタムが起きて、そしてユタの方に年間ですね、やっぱり1,000人ぐらいの人が1,000人以上の人が集まってそこに学ぼうっていう動きがあります。私はその素晴らしい活動をですね、やっぱり日本に導入したいと。どんなことやってるのって言ったら、実は本当に2日間ぐらいのトレーニングで人々の考え方を変え、その今まで思っている常識を非常識で新しい常識に変えるっていうようなトレーニングをしているというふうに聞きました。でそれならばそれをぜひ日本に取り入れていけないかということで、議論してきましてですね、今日ずっと昼間彼女と議論して、こういったトレーニングをやろうということになりました。もともとはガバメントエグゼクティブコースみたいなガバメントに属したものだと思ったけど、今日の話どうですかね。ガバメントにだけと思います？どうです？おそらくセダクティブテストみんな持ってんじゃない？品川の S って会社でもそんな感じしませんかね。なんか非常にアドバンスなイノベーティブな会社だったかもしれないけど、今なんかかなり組織の壁とかもっと予算をとかそんなのやってるような気がするんですよ。で実はこの知識体系は行政だけにやるのもったいない。もちろん行政が一番大事だと思ってるんでそれをやろうと思ってるんですけども、実はこんなふうにして、ちゃんと国際認定を取っていただいて、2ヶ月です。で組織に目覚ましい成果をもたらすマネージャーを取らせるということで、実践でマネジメントコースをやっていこうと いうことをやっていこうということ。最初は2日間、やっていただいて、クリスが自ら宣誓していただきます。もちろん通訳もつきます。TOC を精通した人間がつきますので、非常に分かりやすい内容になると思います。まず最初の、取り組むべき質問は、何が成果を出すのを妨げているのかと。皆さんの周りでもこういうことがあるからなんかできないんじゃないかってあるじゃないですか。その上辺のことじゃなくて、本当のコアは何かっていうことをみんなで自分で分析すると。教えてもらうんじゃなくて自分で見つけるってどうでしょう。人に言われるより自分で見つけるから分かると。でそしてその2日目はそのコアの問題を見つけながら、上辺の症状じゃなくてコアの見つけながらどうやって目覚ましい成果をもたらすかっていうことについて、みんなで見つけるということをしていく。でその後ですね、ここではリーダードマインドテスト、セダクティブ7、7つの誘惑、そしてビシャスサイクルっていうのがある。でその後なんですけども、実践から1ヶ月ぐらい実践していただこうということです。で実践して成果出なかったらこれ落第ということになりますが、知識体系はしっかりしてますから実践は必ずできると思います。でその後ですね、実践から学び続け、さらになる目覚ましい成果をもたらすためにどうしたらいいかということで、さまざまな皆さんが思ったよりうまくいったこと、思った通りにいったこと、思ったよりうまくいかなかったこと、全部に学びがあるって学びの仕方を教育させていただいて、そこからまたさまざまな4週間やったことについて皆さんがお互いに学び合い、そしてそこからブレイクスルーの知識体系を作っていくことをワークショップとしてやっていただきます。特に PDCA サイクルを回すって言葉なんですけど、 PDCA サイクルって回ったら見たことあるね。この笑いですよ。 PDCA サイクルを回す本ってめちゃくちゃ売れてるんですけど、あれ読んで PDCA が回せるようになったら聞いたことあるね。誰も彼もが重要だと思ってできないっていうのはなぜか。それの実は本当のコアの問題解決してないだけかもしれない。実はそれをシンプルに回すこともできるんじゃないだろうかということで、PDCA サイクルをどうやってシンプルに回すかっていうたったシンプルな質問っていうのがあるんですけど、それを学んでいただいて、実際にこのコースの中でも実は自分の学びを PDCA サイクルで回るっていうこともやっていただきます。要するに練習もちゃんとついてるということですね。また4週間で我々は宿題やったかっていういわゆるですね、夏休みの宿題の起こさせないためにですね、ちゃんとリマインドメールを出していただいて、その後ですが最後のワンデーセッションでは目覚ましい成果をもたらす心構えとはっていうことで、実はそんなに難しくない実は心構えがあるんだって、ここさえ押さえとけば大丈夫だって心構えを学んでいただくでいうことで、2ヶ月間で、本当に参加していただくのはたった4日です。そんな4日間でやっていこうというふうなことでプログラムを作りました。もちろんすでに全米ではもううまくいってるプログラムですので、日本の状況に合わせるっていうことで今日精査してみますけど、間違いなくうまくいくなって感じがします。今日の話に共感できるような皆さんであれば、環境であれば、実は行政も実は民間も関わらず、多分いろいろなセダクティブ7があるんだろう。それをブレイクスルーする能力というのは実は本当にマネージメントができるという能力である。これをマネージャーのレベルから学んでいただいて目覚ましい成果を出し、それを目覚ましい成果を出した上でまた皆さんが偉くなっていただくということで、そして日本を良くしていただくようなプログラムをやっていこうかということで合意していました。日付についてはまだ決まってませんが、明日までに決めていただけるというふうに聞いてます。スタートはお盆明けにしたいと思ってます。で2日間最初コースあった後に月に一遍の1日だけということになってますが、日付が決まりましたらまた皆さんに報告させていただきます。まず行政スタートを先に報告させていただいてから、民間にも言われると思いますが、最初キャパシティの都合もありまして多分2、30人ぐらいしか最初はちょっと非常に密なコースになってましてですね、先生もたくさんちゃんとつけるという形になってますので、そういったコースをやりたいと思ってますので、よかったらぜひちょっとその8月ぐらいにあるなっていうのだけ頭の中に隅に入れていただければと思ってます。もう一度わざわざ日本に来ていただいて日本を良くするために貢献していただきましたクリスにもう一度拍手をお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございました。